Something has changed in Los Angeles. There are barely any black people left in Los Angeles, and there is a reason for this. LA, the birthplace of legends like Florence Griffith Joyner, better known to the world as Flo Jo. A city where sunshine, palm trees, Hollywood, sports, music, and black culture all collided to create one of the most recognizable places on earth. Los Angeles was never just beaches and movie stars. It was Watts. It was Central Avenue. It was Crenshaw. It was Leimert Park, and also Baldwin Hill and View Park. LA also had Crenshaw and Compton too. There were churches, barbershops, beauty salons, jazz clubs, soul food restaurants, record stores, swap meets, schoolyards, and entire neighborhoods where black families built something that felt permanent. But today, many people look around and ask the same question. Why are there barely any black people left in Los Angeles? This is the data they did not show you. In 1980, the city of Los Angeles had roughly 495,292 non-Hispanic black residents, making up about 16.7% of the city. That was not a small community. That was a major part of the city's identity. By 1990, that number had already dropped to 454,289 black residents, or about 13% of the city. By 2000, Los Angeles had about 401,986 non-Hispanic black residents, making up about 10.9%. By 2010, that number fell to around 347,380, or 9.2%. And by the 2020 census, the black population in the city of Los Angeles had dropped to about roughly 8.3% of the city. That means Los Angeles lost more than 170,000 black residents from its 1980 peak inside the city limits. And that happened while the total population of Los Angeles grew from under 3 million people in 1980 to nearly 3.9 million people by 2020. So the question is not just where did black people go? The real question is, what happened to a city that once helped define black culture on the West Coast, but now has a black population barely over 8%? That kind of drop does not happen naturally. It occurs when the structure of a city changes. It happens when jobs disappear and when housing becomes impossible. It also happens when neighborhoods are renamed, redeveloped, and rebranded, and when a people are still used as the cultural image of a place, even while they are being priced out of the actual place. To understand Los Angeles, it is necessary to go back. Black Los Angeles was not an accident. It was built. During the early 20th century, black migrants came west from Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and other parts of the South. Many were running from Jim Crow, racial violence, debt peonage, lynching, and a social system designed to keep black people poor, scared, and trapped. Los Angeles promised something different, not perfect, but different. Sunshine, jobs, land. A new start. A place where the racial hierarchy of the South did not seem as visible at first glance. PBS SoCal notes that the second Great Migration of the 1940s made the largest impact on black Los Angeles, as World War II defense production created demand for labor in industries like automobile, rubber, steel, and war manufacturing. Before the war, Los Angeles had a smaller black community, centered heavily around Central Avenue. But during the 1940s, everything changed. USC's historic Central Avenue project notes that more than 140,000 black people arrived in Los Angeles County during the 1940s alone, with the black population growing from about 63,700 in 1940 to approximately 763,000 by 1970. That was the making of Black Los Angeles. Central Avenue became the heartbeat. Before Crenshaw became Crenshaw, Central Avenue was the place. It was the West Coast version of Harlem. It was where black-owned businesses, churches, newspapers, hotels, clubs, and civic institutions created a world within a world. USC's history of Central Avenue describes it as the center of African-American life in Los Angeles after the turn of the 20th century, with the California Eagle calling it the Black Belt of the city by 1915. By the late 1920s, Central Avenue and 41st Street had become a major center of Black Los Angeles, anchored by institutions like the Somerset Hotel, the Hudson Little Building, and the Golden State Mutual Insurance Building. Then came the music, jazz clubs, with the likes of Jelly Roll Morton and others. There was also bebop and R&B. The sounds of New Orleans mixing with the sounds of California. Central Avenue became a place where Black musicians, workers, families, and business owners made Los Angeles feel like a Black city within a larger city. Nightclubs stretched from Little Tokyo toward Watts. The community was not just surviving, it was creating. But even in the middle of that creation, the limits were already there. Los Angeles sold itself as a land of freedom, but Black families still faced restrictive covenants, redlining, segregation, and housing discrimination. They could work in the city, build the city, entertain the city, and fight for the city, but they could not live everywhere in the city. UCLA's History of South Los Angeles notes that racial covenants and redlining restricted where African Americans could buy homes, even as South LA became one of the more accessible areas for Black families to settle and build community. That is how South Los Angeles became Black Los Angeles. Watts, South Central, Crenshaw, Baldwin Hills, View Park, Ladera Heights, Compton, Inglewood. These were not just neighborhoods, they were social worlds. They were places where Black families bought homes, raised children, went to church, opened businesses, and created culture. And out of that world came people who changed America. Flo Jo came out of Los Angeles. She was born in Los Angeles in 1959, and her story is forever connected to the city's Black working-class roots, style, and brilliance. She became one of the most decorated women sprinters in Olympic history, winning multiple Olympic medals and becoming one of the most recognizable athletes of the 1980s. That is the contradiction of Los Angeles. The city had produced other Black legends too, like Natalie Cole and Dr. Dre, to name a few. But the city also made it harder and harder for ordinary Black families to remain. By the 1970s and 1980s, Black Los Angeles had reached a kind of cultural peak. The Black population in the city was at its highest point around 1980. Los Angeles' Black population began growing in the 1950s, reached a peak in the 1980s, and then gradually decreased after that. This was the era when Los Angeles was becoming nationally associated with Black West Coast identity. It was the age of Crenshaw Boulevard, the age of Black radio, the age of Black churches packed on Sundays, the age of backyard barbecues, lowriders, marching bands, school rivalries, and families who had moved west and finally felt like they had made it somewhere. But underneath that image, the foundation was cracking. The first major blow was economic. The Black middle class in Los Angeles was not built only on Hollywood. It was built on jobs. Good blue-collar jobs. Defense jobs, aerospace jobs, manufacturing jobs, auto plants, rubber plants, public sector work, postal jobs, city jobs, union jobs, jobs where a person without a college degree could buy a home, raise children, and become stable. Then those jobs began disappearing. Our weekly reported in 2025 that the decent-paying blue-collar jobs that once attracted Black families to Southern California later left the region, noting the closing of the Firestone tire plant in 1970 and General Motors in 1992 as examples of industrial decline. When the jobs leave, the people do not always leave right away. First, the money gets tight. Then the stores change. Then the schools struggle. Then crime rises. Then the media changes the way it talks about the neighborhood. Then property values fall. Then investors wait. Then years later, when the location becomes valuable again, the people who survived the decline are told they can no longer afford the revival. That is part of what happened in Los Angeles. South Los Angeles became a place that carried the burden of disinvestment. Factories closed, schools struggled. Police brutality and poverty fueled tension. In 1965, Watts exploded after years of inequality, unemployment, and abusive policing. UCLA's South LA History describes the Watts uprising as the result of long-standing economic inequality, discriminatory practices, and police brutality, leaving 34 people dead and millions of dollars in damage. But the story did not stop there. By the 1980s and 1990s, another transformation was underway. South Los Angeles was becoming less Black and more Latino. This part of the story is complicated, because it is not simply a story of one group replacing another. It is a story of overlapping migrations. Black families leaving, Latino immigrants arriving, Central Americans fleeing civil wars in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, Mexican families coming for work and survival, Black families moving to the Inland Empire, the Antelope Valley, North LA County, Las Vegas, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and back to the South. From the 1980s through the 2000s, South LA shifted from roughly 80% African American in the 1980s to over 2/3 Latino, a change made possible by both Latino immigration and the exodus of African Americans to the Inland Empire and North LA County. A Los Angeles Times article from 2008 captured this shift in real time. The article reported that in 1990, South LA was about 47% Latino and 47% African American. By 2006, South LA had changed to 62% Latino and 31% Black. That is not a small change. That is a demographic earthquake inside one of the most important Black regions in the country. The same article noted that South LA was still an area of cultural and political strength for African Americans, but that the numbers had changed dramatically. It also pointed to persistent poverty, unemployment, lower educational attainment, fewer neighborhood jobs, foreclosure pressure, and the rising threat of gentrification. That is the newspaper article that tells the story. By 2008, the shift was already visible. Black Los Angeles had not disappeared overnight. It had been moving for decades. Some of that movement was voluntary. Families wanted larger homes, safer neighborhoods, better schools, more space, a quieter life, a backyard, a garage, a chance to own something bigger than what they could afford in South LA. For many families, Palmdale, Lancaster, Moreno Valley, Rialto, Fontana, Victorville, Corona, Riverside, and San Bernardino looked like opportunity. In 1991, the Los Angeles Times reported that the Antelope Valley was rapidly diversifying. Palmdale and Lancaster saw major growth among Black residents during the 1980s, and the article explained that some urban residents were moving outward in search of affordable housing and an escape from crime and violence. New houses in the Antelope Valley were selling for half to one-third the price of comparable homes in the San Fernando Valley. That is why people left, but there was a cost. When Black families moved farther out, they often gained square footage but lost proximity. They lost the old church around the corner. They lost the auntie who watched the kids and the neighborhood barber who knew everybody. They lost the short commute and lost the cultural density of Black Los Angeles. And for some, the move outward did not mean wealth. It meant longer drives, higher gas costs, weaker public transportation, fewer jobs nearby, and a life stretched between the dream of home ownership and the exhaustion of distance. This is how displacement often works in Los Angeles. It does not always look like someone being dragged out of a home. Sometimes it looks like a family deciding, we can't do this anymore. The second major force was housing. Los Angeles became one of the most unaffordable housing markets in America. Census Quick Facts lists the median value of owner-occupied housing units in Los Angeles City at $921,200, with median gross rent at $1,933. It also lists the owner-occupied housing unit rate at just 36%, meaning most residents are renters. Renters are more vulnerable to displacement. They do not benefit from rising property values in the same way homeowners do. When rents rise, they have fewer options. And when the entire region becomes expensive, moving somewhere cheaper can mean leaving the city, the county, or the state altogether. UCLA Blueprint described the dimensions of LA's housing crisis as severe, noting that Los Angeles had become the least affordable large metropolitan area in America by late 2020, and that only 11% of families could afford a median-priced home. The same analysis notes that Black and Latino households were more likely to be rent-burdened than white and Asian households. That is the trap. The city becomes expensive. The wages do not catch up. The homes become million-dollar assets. The rents rise. The children of homeowners inherit valuable property, but often cannot afford the taxes, repairs, or surrounding cost of living. Some sell, some leave, Some are pushed out. Some stay, but feel like strangers in a neighborhood that now markets their culture back to them. Look at Leimert Park. Leimert Park has long been described as the cultural heart of Black Los Angeles. It is where people gathered after triumphs and tragedies. It is where artists, drummers, poets, vendors, elders, and families made public Black culture visible. But the Los Angeles Times reported that as Black Angelenos moved out of South LA for cheaper housing and safer streets, Leimert Park lost some of its magic. The same article described fears that development along the Crenshaw corridor, metro rail expansion, and major projects nearby could accelerate gentrification. That is the new Los Angeles. A place can still have the murals, the festivals, the music, the restaurants, the street names, the historical markers, the branding. But the people who gave the place its identity may no longer be able to afford to live there. And that is why this story is so painful. Because Black Los Angeles did not only decline because Black people left. It declined because the conditions that once allowed Black families to build community were dismantled. First there was segregation, then there was disinvestment, job loss, there was the crack era and gang violence, and there was the 1992 uprising and the national image of South Central as dangerous. You see, immigration and demographic changes also played a role. Foreclosures happened, redevelopment and gentrification. Then there was the housing crisis. And now, there is a city where Black culture remains famous, but Black residents are a shrinking share of the population. This does not mean Black people are gone completely from Los Angeles County. That is an important distinction. Many Black Angelenos are still in the county, and many are in cities outside the city of Los Angeles. Inglewood, Long Beach, Carson, Hawthorne, Gardena, Compton, Lancaster, Palmdale, Altadena, Pasadena, and other communities. But even countywide, the Black share has declined. Census data shows Los Angeles County had about 926,360 non-Hispanic Black residents in 1980, roughly 12.4% of the county. By 2020, the county had about 760,689 non-Hispanic Black residents, roughly 7.6%. So this is not only a city story, it is a regional story. Black Los Angeles did not vanish, it scattered. It moved north to the Antelope Valley, east to the Inland Empire, south to Texas, back to Georgia, to Nevada, to Arizona, to cheaper suburbs, to places where the rent was not eating up every paycheck, to places where a person might still buy a home. But scattering changes a community. A concentrated Black community can build institutions. It can shape politics. It can elect leaders. It can protect businesses. It can sustain churches. It can create a cultural ecosystem. But when that community spreads across hundreds of miles, its political and cultural power changes. That is why Los Angeles still feels Black in the imagination, but not always in the numbers. Hollywood still sells Black Los Angeles. The music industry still sells Black Los Angeles. Sports and fashion still sells Black Los Angeles, and of course, tourism still sells Black Los Angeles. But census data tells another story. The Black share of Los Angeles has been cut roughly in half since 1980, from about 1 in 6 residents to about 1 in 12. From nearly 500,000 Black residents inside the city to just over 322,000. That is not just a statistic. That is a family reunion with fewer cousins still in town and a church with more funerals than baptisms. A school where the old neighborhood children are now commuting from somewhere else. That is a grandmother's house sold after she dies because the grandchildren cannot afford to keep it, or a beauty salon replaced by a coffee shop. Los Angeles is a place where others still wants the rhythm, the slang, the food, the music, and the cool of Black people. But not always the actual Black people. And this is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Some people will say, that is just change. Cities change, populations change, people move, new immigrants arrive, old residents leave. That is true. But the question is whether all groups are equally positioned to survive that change. Black Los Angeles entered the housing crisis with the scars of redlining, restrictive covenants, job discrimination, freeway construction, disinvestment, predatory lending, and exclusion from wealth-building opportunities. UCLA Blueprint notes that African American communities were repeatedly denied opportunities to accumulate wealth and own property, while post-war federal housing programs and FHA-backed suburban development often benefited white families and excluded black families. So when housing prices exploded, black residents were not simply competing in a fair market. They were competing in a market shaped by decades of exclusion. That is the part people leave out. The city did not become unaffordable in a vacuum and became unaffordable after generations of black families had already been denied equal access to property, loans, safer neighborhoods, and wealth. Then when some black communities finally became desirable, the cost of staying rose beyond what many could manage. That pattern is not unique to Los Angeles. It happened in Oakland, it happened in Harlem and Washington, D.C. The pattern is familiar. Black communities are pushed into neglected areas. They build life there. They create culture there. They survive there. Then the area becomes valuable. Then the language changes. It becomes revitalization. It becomes development. It becomes mixed use. It becomes transit-oriented. It becomes luxury. It becomes up and coming. And then the people who held the neighborhood together are asked why they could not keep up. Los Angeles is especially strange because the image of Black Los Angeles is still so powerful. People still talk about Crenshaw like it is frozen in 1992. You can still hear people still talk about South Central like it is the center of Black America on the West Coast. People still associate LA with Black music, Black athletes, Black movies, Black comedians, Black churches, Black street culture, and Black style. But the actual demographics have changed. South LA is not the same South LA of the 1970s. Compton is majority Latino. Inglewood is changing. Leimert Park is under pressure. Baldwin Hills and View Park are expensive. The Crenshaw Corridor is being redeveloped. Altadena, long a haven for Black home ownership, has faced new fears of displacement after devastating fires and rising rebuilding costs. And across the region, younger Black Angelenos often face a hard question: stay in the city that shaped their family or leave in order to survive? That is the real story. The disappearance of Black Los Angeles is not about laziness. It is not about Black people abandoning their own neighborhoods. It is not about one immigrant group replacing another. It is not about one simple cause. It is about a chain reaction. The Great Migration brought Black families west. Defense and manufacturing jobs helped build a Black middle class. Segregation confined that middle class to certain areas. Disinvestment weakened those areas. Job losses reduced economic stability. Crime and policing damaged daily life. Immigration changed the demographic mix. Housing prices exploded. Foreclosures stripped wealth. Redevelopment made old neighborhoods attractive to wealthier outsiders. And the people who built Black Los Angeles became less visible inside Los Angeles itself. So the question remains, why are there barely any Black people left in Los Angeles? The answer is not that they simply disappeared. A lot of things happened, like people being priced out, or they were worn down by decades of economic pressure. They were replaced in the city's housing market, even while their culture remained part of the city's brand. Los Angeles still has Black history, but history is not the same as presence. Scope News tells the truth. Here are the facts. Data referenced in this report comes from U.S. Census Bureau decennial census figures, Census Quick Facts for Los Angeles City, Los Angeles Times Census Reporting, UCLA Luskin Research on South Los Angeles, PBS SoCal History of the Great Migration in Los Angeles, USC's Historic Central Avenue Project, UCLA Blueprint Housing Research. Our weekly's reporting on African American population shifts in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles Times reporting on South LA, Leimert Park, the Antelope Valley, and Black migration patterns. Legal disclaimer. This content is for educational, informational, historical, and commentary purposes. It is based on publicly available census data, historical records, newspaper reporting, academic research, and demographic analysis.